Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Matt Chat, brought to you by USA Wrestling, the national governing body for wrestling in the United States, and by Nike Wrestling. Go to athleteps.com for all of your Nike and USA Wrestling branded gear. Today, I am joined by my good friend, Chris Owens, who is, I want to get this right, Chris, the Director of Wrestling Operations for Idaho USA Wrestling. Got a chance to see you in Fargo. We at least see each other once a year. Good to see you, my friend. How are you doing?
Doing good, buddy. How are you doing?
Well, like I said before we set this up, not as good as you. And we're going to get into all of this. I think you look, when you're a coach, you don't look for storylines. When you're doing what I'm doing, you still remember what it's like to be a coach. You're still coaching a little bit, but not full time. The storylines become more important. And to me, a couple of them were clubs that did really well, certain schools that did really well. Because I run the Hall of Fame Dual Meet Classic, and I'm looking at how, like, the Powways and the Edmund Norths and the Stillwaters and the Faith Christians and the Sems and those kind of schools, the Del Bartons and all those kind of schools did. But I think the storyline from people that aren't deep into it is, what in the hell is going on in Idaho? I mean, right? Like, you're not a traditional state power, right? You're not Pennsylvania, you're not California, you're not Illinois. So let's just start with kind of give me the perspective of, like, those are very densely populated states. Like, how many people are members of USA Wrestling in Idaho? And then kind of just help us get like the 50,000 foot view on some of this.
All right, buddy. Sounds good. A little bit of a deep dive, huh? So we just broke the 4,000 member mark for USA Wrestling members in Idaho this past season for the first time ever. It was trending this way pre-COVID. We were probably 300 or 400 members away from that mark. So since then, it's kind of been recovering those numbers, probably like similar to most state associations. But it actually was maybe an opportunity for us to kind of get better at some of the areas we needed to improve on, particularly in the grassroots. USA Wrestling's always kind of in Idaho. We've always had the high level opportunities per se. Fargo training camp has kind of been our top billing since, about 95 when I took over coaching the Fargo team. There's a direct benefit with me coaching at Boise State then for us to invest back into the development of Idaho wrestlers, right? So, yeah. But we, around 2001, 2002, we really, I think, did a good job of developing our league wrestling, our regional kind of grassroots clubs, and particularly the seasons, right? Because one of the things I noticed when I started doing this job was that it was really hard to define what a season was for the different age groups of development. Because, I think my mind tends to kick over to the coaching side of things. And I relate it to, past experiences, right, through coaching. Remembering back, I was not the best wrestler, age group wrestler in the Northwest at a younger age. And I saw a lot of my friends that maybe didn't necessarily wrestle in high school that were very good at a young age. And I don't know, perspective on that, right, is, the attrition of our sport is, it's pretty, I don't know if it's high, but there's just a lot of, if you're very competitive, the losses are very personal, and managing that, because I'm also a director too. And, trying to create a system and infrastructure that can help us grow our numbers, fill up our clubs, and, with our top goal maybe being, feeding our high school programs and making sure those youth wrestlers hit the high school rooms. Right. So, the 4,000 member mark was a big deal for us this year. A lot of excitement around that. So it's neat for it to culminate with, a good performance at the national tournament, the last tournament of the season. So I think there's a lot of positive and a lot of buzz around the state, around the Olympic styles and the interest. There's challenges, right? There's so many opportunities for kids to wrestle folk style. Back to one of my original comments about defining the seasons was really, figuring out where freestyle Greco fits into the Idaho landscape, and running events too. So that's another part of my job.
Yeah. You guys have done a good job of making it important. So you mentioned, I'm going to come back to Fargo, but you mentioned this thing about attrition and development and like yourself. Like I didn't really start wrestling competitively till I was 12. I had one tournament in the 4th grade. It's a terrible story. It's a funny, terrible story, but it didn't go well. But like, so when I started at 12, there was kids that had wrestled forever. But by the time they were 18, they disliked their dads and they disliked the sport because their dads had made them go and they had just done it so long. And I remember when I had Sean Bourmet on the podcast, he goes, there's only so much tread on the tires. And you got to figure out when you're going to take the tread off the tires. And USA Wrestling has this big statement up at Colorado Springs, like, you can either try to have the best 8 to 18-year-old in the country, or you can try to have the best 18 to 28-year-old in the world, but it's very difficult to do both. And I think all three of you guys are kind of saying things the same way, right? Like I talked to a lot of coaches that are as smart as you, and I'm not saying you said this, but like when they got their kids in it, they had them do gymnastics or judo first, like to learn how to fall, to work on their flexibility, to not be scared of like back arches and movements like that. And way less concerned about winning or even technique, just like learning how to compete and have a good time and not over practice. If you're only going to have your son or daughter practice twice a week, you can't really expect them to win, because you're also trying not to burn them out. And so I'm guessing you're like every person in authority where you deal with your share of crazy parents, right?
For sure. It's intoxicating, I think, with watching your son or daughter have success, and keep, and having managing that on the healthy side of knowing what it's going to be like, when your son or daughter is 16, and then, training becomes maybe a little bit more important. Strength training, skill development, number of practices per week goes up. There has to be a love for wrestling in the athlete in order for those things to come into play, right? So I think one of the things I say, I don't know, I probably stole it from somebody. You can't wrestle for somebody else, right? It has to be in your heart. It really does. Because when it comes down to it and you get older, you're going to have to get good at doing things that are really tough and really hard. And learning to enjoy the process of wrestling, without the extra demands of weight cutting when you're younger, or even over competing. There's a lot of anxiety and stress on an athlete when they're making weight and wrestling in national tournaments. So I think managing how many of those tournaments kids at younger ages, wrestle in, is something to be cognizant of. But of course that a lot of it, is driven, ultimately the decisions are made by the parents. They're the ones paying the bills. So guiding and recommending, but also being flexible and working with people and, realizing, those aren't my decisions, but we can help build a good blueprint to help educate the upcoming parents, right? Yeah. I mean, it's fun. It's exciting. I like giving back in that aspect because I think there's a lot of that on the developmental side that maybe hasn't been at least in Idaho, hasn't been available, right? So, but a lot of that, I mean, the coaches education program in USA Wrestling is phenomenal, right? So, I mean, there's really good formulas and information out there to pass along that, that I really enjoy that. I do. I love it. I enjoy getting that information out to our wrestling community.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of things, but two things kind of popped out of that. One is like, I think like parents that are new to the sport is they need to realize like our sport's like a funnel. Like when you're 6, you can wrestle 200 matches a year. And then when you're like 28, like some of these men and women are wrestling maybe 10, 12, 15 matches a year. And then is it really important to wrestle 200 matches a year when you're 6 or 8 years old? Like if you're actually trying to get better at wrestling and keep the person to love the sport, can you burn them out? You mentioned, like you said, if you love the sport, you need to love the sport because later you're going to have to do really hard things in it. Mm-hmm. The other thing that you talked about having like skill sets and things like that. I was lucky enough to have Sergei Beloglazov come in to do clinics in Kansas City and St. Louis and spent time with him in both and then in the car. And he mentioned that back when he wrestled, I mean, I don't know if it's the case now, but in Russia, there was a book or a booklet and there was a set of skills. And he said every club had to teach these skills. And, you can't make them teach it identically, but like, you got to know these things. And like, I know a good friend of mine pulled his kid out of a club because all the coach wanted to teach was spladles. And like, well, we're just going to do something nobody else is doing. Like, well, maybe there's a reason why nobody else is doing it, but like how important in kids' development, because like what I do is sort of the 50,000 foot view. Like I just get to comment like on how good Aiden Atau is or how good Mac Mauger is. Like, and when we coached in college, you tried to recruit the best kids possible. You did development, but you didn't develop them like when they were 7, when they didn't know what a stance or a drop step was. There's levels of development and progression. And I think some of the heroes are the good coaches that are developing kids the right way at a youth level. How important is it to have like a uniform, not only set of skills, but maybe a progression? Like, hey, you learn this first, this second, this third. Here's where you learn offense. Here's where you learn defense. Here's where you learn. We don't even worry about tactics till you're this age because we want it to be fun for you. How important is that, or how would you do it, I guess, if like you ran the youth wrestling world?
Great question. And I think an evolving question too, right? So I do actually.
I think you're frozen right now. I don't know if you can hear me, but you said. I can see now. You still there?
I'm here. Yep.
Okay. You said, I think, and then it cut out, and I want to get your whole answer.
Okay. I think that, with development, I still do the coaching side. So I run 2 state practices almost, beginning of October through the middle part of June. And I'm working with clubs. So I don't run a club. I do state practices. So anybody with a USA Wrestling card can come to my practices. I call them best on best practices. And I do them in the Boise area, but then also have one that's 100 miles from Boise down in the Wendell area, right? We get kids that drive over from East Idaho. I really enjoy it because I get to work with different age groups at different times of the year. During the high school season, I don't encourage high school kids to come. In fact, I don't want them to come, right? I don't. My top goal is to work with coaches, not against them, right? And my opinion on that is during the high school season, they have coaches. It's within the IHSA rules for them to come, but the only way I'd be okay with them coming is if the high school coach either reached out to me and expressed interest. So, I know we're on the same page, right? And we're not pulling on the rope different directions. But as far as development, I'm a believer in, I don't know, I think I stole this from my high school coach, Cliff Laughlin, and Doc Bennett, good
Yeah,
friend of mine, right? Just
Doc B's the man.
recently just actually moved from Boise down to Tempe, Phoenix, Arizona. So, but, we spent a lot of time together talking about, philosophies of coaching and development. And Doc was a high school coach prior to going to work for USA Wrestling. He was a high school coach in the Tri-Cities at 3 different high schools. So really good, unique perspective on things. Also, at the senior level, having done as much video as he's done. I helped him do a lot of the, cutting for the previous or the most recent world championships and Olympics. So really awesome experience for me in learning, not how to scout, but what it takes for top wrestlers to score on each other. Right. And it really, some things that really stood out to me. So I really
what stood out to you on because that's fascinating. I'm a nerd, so I'm here for all of that.
Honestly, the top thing that stood out to me is in order for them to score on each other, they really don't score on each other. I'm talking about freestyle. When they're in on the legs, if they don't get the foot off the mat. If the foot's on the mat and they're going from one leg to chasing 2 or even back to 1, the counter offense is in play. But when the foot is off the mat, the hips are out of play, which, the counter action, crotch lift, chest wrap, front head throws, counter actions are out of play. So getting the foot off the mat has really been a lot of, an area of focus, for my teaching since I started doing this job and, being involved with Doc on some of the scouting stuff. But I believe that I think you have to wrestle for a while to learn the martial art of the whole thing, how to grab handholds, how to set up your actions, how to finish your actions. But more than anything, I think there's a really important set of motor skills, right, that you have to do. I believe that.
Like what motor skills?
Really good question.
You can't tee it up and then not ask me.
No, it's good. I fully expected you to ask that. Right. So that's an evolving thing, right? How to bring those motor skills together. I think a back arch is incredibly important. Being able to maintain pressure into your opponent with the dive roll techniques in college wrestling that's prevalent now in high school and even younger age. Maintaining head and shoulder position and pressure into your opponent is very similar to a back arch, right? If you're lifting, you're going from one leg to 2 legs, taking your opponent off their base, controlling and securing the legs. A semi-modified back arch is really what you're doing. You're maintaining pressure into your opponent, wrapping both legs, taking them off the mat, but you're also, with your head and shoulder position, pressuring in. That's actually what's keeping your opponent off your ankles or, a counter lock, like a crotch lift or cutting the corner and putting a leg in type thing. So that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I just think it's interesting. You mentioned the martial art thing, and I think, you and I have known each other a long, long time. And like my dad is 8th degree black belt in 3 different martial arts, and he always taught wrestling to us like a martial art. It's never like you just got to do it harder. It's like there's skill and pressure and leverage, and sometimes when to release pressure. So then the person, like goes back to that. If you want to close space on an opponent, there's 2 ways to do it. You go to him, or you make it so he comes to you. Those kind of things. And I realized like how I learned wrestling is not how a lot of people learn wrestling, for good or bad. It's just different. It was like a martial arts approach. Like I was really, really physically weak the first year I won state and the year I won Fargo, but like it was okay. We figured out other ways to get it done. And then when you get stronger, then it just theoretically gets easier because, you know, now you don't have to worry about getting horsed in as many positions. You know, but it's super. You mentioned something else a few minutes ago about not wanting the kids to come of a certain age unless their coach comes with them or sends them specifically. And I think that's like where I see there's some cooperation there, but there's a lot of conflict. Like, and it's tricky, right? Like, let's say you are who you are, and there's a really good kid, and I'm a high school coach, but I open the doors on November 1st and I shut them down on March 1st. And I'm just doing this to get the extra $7,000 a year and to pad my pension payout. And I'm also on the football and the baseball, and I'm not really a wrestling guy, you know, and the school doesn't really care, you know, but the kid can't afford to move or can't afford to go to private school. And again, in Idaho, things are more spread out. So the options would be even more prohibitive or less available, however you want to say it. Then I can see why like a club coach would go, well, this kid's special and, you know, I'm going to step in because, you know, this kid comes from maybe a lower economic status. And if I can help him get a scholarship, and I'm going to ask you about NIL and stuff like that. But like now there's more opportunities for this kid to actually get to make a life for himself, you know, and versus I'm the guy that coaches. I'm the high school coach that's like you in a different role. I'm coaching 12 months of the year. I'm studying. And I'm like, hey, Chris, I got no problem if you want to pour your knowledge into this young man or woman. And even if it's a different perspective, he or she's going to bring it back to me the next day and we're going to talk about it. And we're going to find out what's best for him or her because we both want the same thing, which is for him or her to succeed. And I would imagine you're dealing with coaches at both ends of that spectrum. And it would be difficult, I think, to sort of navigate those waters, right?
Yeah. I think that's a good statement for sure. I don't dive in too deep on that one because really most of that is out of my control.
Sure.
It really is. So, and you know, in wrestling, like if you're going to stick with the sport, if you want to take those next jumps, you're going to have to find a couple things, right? You're going to have to find partners, and you're going to have to find opportunities, and you're going to have to find coaching, right? Yeah. You are. Yeah. And, you know, with that being said, you know, sometimes less is more. I don't think a kid has to train 7 practices a week. I really don't, Dave. I don't believe that. I would rather have a kid with 2 to 3 really good practices per week and do cross training and, you know, put time into other areas of the sport. Right. So the focus being that, you know, your practice is very quality time, you know, not quantity. As you know, when kids get into college, they're going to be doing those 5 to 7 practices per week, right?
And you're seeing the trend in college, though, that they're shortening practices, right? And
absolutely.
I talked to Brian Smith after the Big 12s. I got to interview him the day before the NCAAs, and he said something that was fascinating to me. He said between the Big 12s and the NCAAs, they had one team practice.
Yep.
He said that everything was one-on-ones.
Okay.
And you know how one-on-ones are. Like if we're the same age, I'm not going to hypothetically who's coaching who, but like let's say you're the starter and I'm the backup and the coach is working with us. Like I'm just there to help you in that hour. Like, hey, David, let's get in. Let's help Chris with baseline defense, or let's help him with breakdowns. I'm just there to give you as many reps as you need. And I just thought that was like, it shows the commitment of those coaches to that program, right? Because they're not coaching 2 hours a day now. They're coaching, they're all coaching, 4 to 6 hours a day. And every session's different, right? Like some might be sparring, some might be positions, some might be drilling, some might be watching film, some might be psychological training, mental training, positive mindset, all those different things. So I just thought that's interesting, but you're absolutely right that the grind of college is different. Although I think it's less grindy than when you and I wrestled. I feel like that's the case now. I feel like that coaches have figured out there's overtraining. What you're saying can be a problem. I remember Couture told me he was at the Worlds, and like 2 days before the Worlds, they're beating the hell out of each other, and the Russians are playing dodgeball. And we saw how that turned out.
Yeah.
So, hey, I don't want to bury the lead. Tell me, we talked about this quickly off air. You're a guy that's, no matter how it goes, you're not satisfied. Idaho could win every age, every style, and there'll still be a couple kids that didn't win their weight that you'd be upset about, or you didn't get the outstanding wrestler. I get it. You're always reaching, but how significant is it for the state of Idaho to win the team title in Greco in Fargo?
It's amazing, right? It's a dream come true. It really is. I think it's a goal that was maybe in the back of my head for many, many years, right? But as we saw this group of juniors coming up, when I first started in 2017 with Idaho USA Wrestling, this group was, do the math, right? They were going into the 12U, 14U age, right?
Right.
And with a lot of family support, and those kids traveled a lot. The dynamic, I guess, of youth wrestling, there's a lot of opportunities around the country for kids to go get mat time. And one of the things I noticed was particularly the dual meet events, right? Back east, these kids, they get hooked up with some of these clubs or these travel teams, and there's multiple opportunities for those kids to get on the mat, right? So what we did was we kind of developed the opportunities within Idaho to go wrestle as a state, and kind of build our brand and build the pride of competing, for Idaho. So, and I did a lot of that was just encouraged, right, from the parents, and which many of them are board members now for us. So that was really good. That was really good advice. And it really kind of came together. What we had to do though, was we had to figure out, what is too much, what is a good number of events, and manage the length of the season. Right. So I think we did a good job, and incredible support from my board. And we've actually recently hired a second employee who's kind of managing the girls side of things. His name's Fred Bartlett, doing a really good job. Has coached the girls now in Fargo a couple years, but we really had a lot of good minds and, come together and kind of create a plan of what we thought it was going to be like. But still, I don't know if winning the national championship as a team was a real, I don't know, possibility, I guess, until we were third and fourth last year in the junior division. And knowing that we had some 16Us that would be moving up, most of our kids were coming back. So, we committed and we sent a team to the junior duels for the first time ever. So this year is the first time Idaho ever sent a dual team 16U, juniors, and 14U, right? So we just haven't had the number of wrestlers to really kind of do the 16U and juniors the same year, right?
Yeah.
Until this year, right? So there's challenges with that. I mean, because there's some regional things that we do, dual meet wise in June for development that works in and around our Fargo camp. We moved our Fargo camp up earlier, which, to your point of tapering on development, it really works well, right? So our Fargo simulation camp is the end of June, right? So
okay.
Yeah, and it works really good. Looks really good. So, the kids are leaving from there, and the ones that have committed to college, a lot of them are are doing, a little bit of training probably at their university that they're heading to. And then also, we have Suples, Ivan Ivanov, who's a great resource in Greco in our state.
Yeah.
This sort of thing doesn't happen without him being here, right? Just the reality of the whole thing, right? His development in Greco is phenomenal. Some of those kids, when they started training with him and his system, it's amazing how much they developed in Greco, in all styles of wrestling, right? A lot of what he does is strength, building strength, through the Bulgarian bag system, and very, very good at building strength in wrestlers. And you mentioned earlier how that applies to wrestling and the martial arts side of things.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah.
So I guess I should say this. It seems to me that you're more calm, more centered. Like, I get very excitable. How much were you scoreboard watching? And people should know this that don't understand maybe the team scoring of Fargo. There's no pinpoints, any of that stuff. It's just strictly placing points. And so you don't really know where anybody is until they hit the quarterfinals. Like, okay, it is like that in the national tournament in college. Like, okay, once you make the semis, you get 6th place points.
Exactly.
So I guess when you're starting to get in those 6th place points and guys are coming through the backside, how much are you scoreboard watching? How much are you like, where's everybody? Where's Illinois? Where's PA?
Yeah, it's exciting, right? It's exciting.
Yeah,
but also managing that too, right? Like, I think carrying that with you into the corner can be a negative, possibly, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And putting pressure on kids, right, through, internalizing that or thinking about, we need to win this match, as opposed to, just following good processes, right? So for me, I'm not a scoreboard watcher. I never have been, but it's not something I engage in the conversation because it's exciting. It's neat for Idaho to be in the conversation with states like that, right? With Iowa and Pennsylvania and Illinois, right?
Did you have a nerd like on staff that was scoreboard watching for you, like a me, like telling you where you were at all times?
You're not a nerd, buddy, but I hear you.
I got some nerd in me for sure.
No, I love that, right? I do. I love that conversation. But I guess the time and a place for that, right?
Yeah.
Going back to the hotel and enjoying the success of our state. That's exciting. It is. And kind of watching our kids Saturday morning, something I had to say was, hey guys, like, you wrestle for yourself, right? And you're representing your state, but also your community and your high school and your family. And don't forget, right? Why you're good, right? Start trying to win for maybe your state and come through for your state. I just tried to release some of that pressure, right? I mean,
it's good to hear.
We're going to, it's gonna turn out how it's gonna turn out. And and to be honest with you, we have per se some wrestling nerds that were watching the score.
Yeah.
But we didn't know how the other states were doing. There's no way of really knowing that, right? We just know how we're doing.
You'd have to be on Flow Arena constantly. Yeah.
I know. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and I didn't do that. So I didn't know how the other states were doing. And it was kind of interesting because at heavyweight in the semifinals, Iowa, they challenged a call, which actually ended up being a potential protest.
Okay.
We were the last ones in the arena, and it kind of went on for about 45 minutes, just under an hour. And we were already the last match. Okay.
Yeah.
But fast forward now another hour into the break, we're sitting there waiting for the results of, the review, because I think the review committee, they were deciding on whether or not they're going to accept it. And there's some dynamics to that I didn't even know, to be honest with you, which was good information for me as a coach. And if they would have overturned or changed the call, accepted the protest, right? What was going to happen? So I was trying to paint the worst case scenario for my athlete. Hey, if they change this call, this is what's going to happen, which I didn't know this. I don't know if you know this, but if they change the call, okay, or accept the protest, okay, overturn the call on the mat, we're going to go back and wrestle the beginning of that second period. So the score is going to go back to what the score was at break, not at the time of the call.
So I want to make sure I understand this. The whole first period happened. The challenge is in the second periid. Let's
halfway
just say
through, maybe halfway through the second period. Yep.
But 90 seconds are left, just to put a time period on it. If the challenge is accepted, the call is reversed, they just go back to the beginning of the second period.
That's what I was told. Yep. I was told that by the mat chairman on the mat. I didn't know that. So to me, the important thing was painting a picture in our athlete's mind of what the score would be if the call is changed.
Got to be ready for this. Yeah, you can't be surprised.
Yeah, because you don't want to be just lambasted with, what do you mean? Then you feel like you get cheated, and then all of a sudden, maybe our wrestler, he's wrestling frustrated, etc. Right?
Sure.
So I just said, hey, calmly, this is what would happen if they change the call. It's out of our hands. I don't think they'll change it. Because there was a lot of scoring that happened. I think the score at the end of the match was maybe 9-4, 10-4. But at break, the score was 4-3, right? So that was going to be a big change. Anyway, but it was the call was not changed, but it was actually a really good request of protest on the Iowa's part, right? Because it was a out of bounds caution, right?
Okay.
Which that
like the one caution, one rule, you mean?
Well, yeah, but not that. It was fleeing the mat or fleeing the hold, right? But we were grounded. Okay. So the wherever the caution happens, they go back in the middle of the mat. The wrestlers assume the position the caution happened in.
Right.
Well, there was not a takedown awarded, but they were grounded. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So they went back in, and our wrestler was on top, and then we proceeded to gut wrench the kid twice. Okay.
So the whole thing gets wiped out. Yeah. Right.
Exactly.
That's the whole Zane Yanni thing that happened like several years ago, like
Good
where
point.
you throw the brick and what happens afterwards. And I will tell anybody this who's watching this, if your goal is to be a good coach at Freestyle Greco or chairman or state director, become friends with good referees.
Man,
these guys are like
great advice. Yeah.
Well, I got to talk to, and I'll give him a shout out, Danny Blackshear, before I did the commentary for the Olympic trials. And now it's really hard because it's a one-person booth. Okay, it's like, A, you hate the sound of your own voice after a day and a half. And B, we're switching back and forth between Greco and freestyle all the time. But like, he gave me such good advice. And one of the things that I got positive feedback on was like, okay, red through the brick. So if red wins, the score is going to be this. And if they don't win, they're going to lose a point and the score is going to be this. And so this is what both coaches are probably talking to their athlete about, as opposed to, well, we'll see what they challenge and we'll see what happens. You're not doing anything to add to the viewing experience or the coaching experience. Like you telling your athlete, look, it's either going to be 10-4 you, or it's going to be 4-3 the other way. And with 3 minutes to go, and we're going to win this match either way, stud.
Exactly. That's right. Teeing it up, letting them know, hey, this is what the score is going to be. If the call goes this way, vice versa, the other way, right? And then go to work on, what the game plan is, right? I love having you on the mic, by the way.
Thank you, man.
Thank you. To listen to you. I really enjoy that.
First of all, thank you. And I'll Venmo you the $20 as soon as we're done for saying that. I think like I grew up watching wrestling with my dad, and I always tell him it's just kind of you and me sitting on the wall watching really good finals. It'd be like if you and me were watching the national finals and just talking about them. And I've also been blessed to work with a lot of, like at junior duels, I got to work with Shannon Gillespie and work with Hardell Moore and work with Ike Anderson. And like, it just doesn't get much better than that, right? Like girls, Greco, boys, like all you kind of got to do is like set the ball and get out of the way, and let them spike. So it's fun. But yeah, like to go back to what you're saying in terms of coaching, a lot of the commentary is like coaching. Like you got to tell the audience what the coaches are thinking and what they're saying to their athletes and preparing their athlete mentally for it's going to be A or it's going to be B. And like, and that's what you were saying in that scenario. Like not only was it important to actually know what the rule, how it could have gone, but like you said, if your kid goes, well, that's a bunch of horse crap that it's going to go back. Like, listen, dude, that doesn't matter anymore. Nope. If this happens, we just got to go score more points for 3 minutes instead of for 90 seconds.
Yep. You bet. Yeah. Freestyle Greco teaches you that, right? As an athlete and as a coach, how to kind of help your athlete land in a good place mentally. Yeah. Right. And with a goal, right? I like that. Your analogy of sharing information with your viewers and comparing that to the coaching aspect. When we came into wrestling, right, we had a lot of really good coaches around that I feel like were very strong in that area. Thinking back on a guy like Mike Haggerty, right? Really good, helped me along in my coaching career at the beginning, understanding the rules, of the Olympic styles, and staying up to speed. A guy like Rusty Davidson, right, was always willing to, spend extra time when I had questions, right?
Yeah.
Of like, why was this call made? And then maybe even go a step farther of, what adjustment could I have made as a coach in the corner to keep your athlete, working on the goal and landing in a good place, right? Making the most of, the time that's left. And, the most important points are the next points, right? Not the previous points. You're not in control of that. Right.
Yeah. It's interesting because you can like I'm blessed. If I literally want to go pick your brain, all I got to do is call you and you're going to call me back within a day. And the vast majority of people that are watching wrestling do not have this network that like people like you and I are blessed to have and be in, right? Like if you said to me, hey, my son wants to get involved in play-by-play, I might just have him call me, right? Like we would help each other. But a lot of people don't have that network. And so like I remember one year in Coralville, I asked one of the referees, can I sit in the pit with the referees during the finals? And he goes, why? I said, I want to know these controversial calls, the logic behind them. I said, I just want to be able to sit next, like if you're one of the refs, but you're rotated out and they challenge, I'm like, why is that a good or bad challenge? Right. Like, and I'm not going to quote you on the air, but like, hey, a well-respected ref said this was a bad challenge because, for example, the camera is at the same view as the people that disagreed with you. They're not going to change it if it was already two people thought that way. And I remember a couple of the refs said, get out of here, which I got because I'm not one of them. And the one guy goes, he's actually going to try to make us sound smarter next week on his podcast. Like he's going to point out like when there's a bunch of folk style people that just don't understand the rules at all. And they're like, well, there's no way that could be that. And it's like, well, no, I'm actually going to educate them by them educating me, educating the audience. So the other thing is no matter how old you are, you can't be too old to ask for help, right? Like you and I think are basically the same age. We graduated the same year coming out of high school. So we got to be within like 12 months of each other. But like you're not coming on the podcast unless I ask you. I got to ask, you got to ask like, and you, even if like there's guys now that are coaching that are younger than me, I coached them, and they're great coaches. They're great coaches, some of the best in the country. I'm like, hey, what are you telling kids when you train kids? What are you telling them in these positions? I can definitely learn from that, right? Like, so, and I think that's kind of the best thing we've been able to do with the play-by-plays is just kind of give people a peek behind it because of the network. Like, talk and like you talk to me like a coach, you know, because or as an ex-wrestler, because we wrestled together, you know. And so I get a little bit different conversations than like if I was just somebody from the media. Like I'm a guy you knew from wrestling that happens to be at USA Wrestling now, not you knew me from USA Wrestling my whole life. So that's a blessing. I want to go back to, you know, we talked off air and you're like, we won Greco. We wish we'd won freestyle. We didn't, nobody has all their hammers, but we definitely had some guys left behind. As a guy that was a great wrestler, is doing an unbelievable job of this. We have a lot of athletes that watch this podcast and they're looking for inspiration and guidance. If you could just advise the average kid, what should their mindset be going into Fargo? Because I will tell you this, I just turned 53 years old. It's a lot. There's 30 mats, right? There's 30 mats. There's 7,000 athletes, 14,000 matches. Somebody asked me that. I'm like, I think you got to find the right level of selfish. Like, you can't be there all day rooting. You got to go back and get your rest. You got to get your diet right. You got to have a routine. But I'm not running a whole state. You know, I'm the guy that just gets to stand next to the mat because I got a media pass. So, you know, like, what would be some advice or perspective on that scenario?
Well, we take care of our team, and when things start to get pared down, we take care of our individuals, right? So if they're done for the session and they're released, we get them back to the hotel so they can get in the air conditioning and relax. Manage their schedules is a really big thing, right? We meet every evening. We have a team meeting, cover the schedule for the next day. Most of our kids are staying on site at our hotel, but some of them aren't. So we have a way to get that information out to the masses. We build our schedule from all the way from knocking on doors and wake up, all the way, depart the hotel, allowing for proper amount of warm-up time, a little bit of just collecting yourself before you wrestle, regrouping, some individual talk. I assign coaches to every wrestler on the team. Okay. I do coaching assignments, and I do coaching assignments based on who knows who's familiar with who, as best you can, because it's not always perfect, right? But with that, it's really cool because it helps me go to another level of understanding our team and the dynamics of the coaches that I go out and recruit coaches to come help. So maybe half to 3/4 of our coaches are high school coaches from our state, but then also there's Idaho wrestlers that are out there wrestling around the country. We had wrestlers come in from Nebraska, Princeton, Southern Oregon, Arizona State, and they were on our coaching staff. And it was really cool because they're obviously close in age to the team members, the Fargo team members, right? So how they respond to them, it's really cool. It's really neat to keep that perspective on our coaching staff, right? I think it makes it a reality for those guys too, right?
For people that are just listening and not watching, when you said assign coaches, like I lost my mind because because I talked to several directors, like some states don't do that. And then I think everybody who's ever been, I was on the coaching staff a couple of years ago, you're in this massive group chat, right? So it's like, hey, Chris Owens is in the hole on mat 17. David Mirikitani is in the hole on mat 19. But it's not like, hey, Ron and Kyle, you go with David, and Steve and Bill, you go with Chris. And so sometimes what happens in a lot of these states are everybody goes to the mat of the good guy.
Yeah.
You get 9 guys standing there, And then you have other kids who come from a school and they got no direct connect there. I had 2 kids ask me to coach them. I didn't know their names.
Exactly.
And then I think there's something else, and we certainly have time to get into it, but like people have to understand that there's coaches that are there for all different reasons. There's some coaches that are there for the best of reasons. They're there to coach their kids, be a part of the process, become a better coach, become a part of the team, chip into something that Chris Owens and Ivanov and other people have built and be a part of it. There's a second set of coaches that are there just to get shine, just to be sitting in the right corner and get in the right picture. And then there's some college coaches, and I was a college coach for a long time, but that are just there to like be in the corner so that kid wants to come wrestle for them, but they've never actually coached them. Like I have a guy who coached a girl, and the girl probably would have won the national. She took 3rd because the wrong coach was talking the whole time in between periods. And I'm like, you got more patience than me, because I would have said to that coach, I'm talking in between periods. Towel her down and say nothing. She trains with me 12 months of the year.
Wow.
And
good perspective, coach. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's because we get to have these private conversations with people. So like when you're assigning people, you're taking a lot, and it's going to hurt some people's feelings, right? Like if a couple of years ago, they put my dad and I on the staff. My dad had like 2 girls he was coaching. And I said, listen, I'm just going because my dad wants a roommate. And I love my dad. And I don't know how many more laps around the sun we got together, so I'm going to go. But I said, you can assign me anybody you want. I know these 2 other kids that I'm friends with that I would probably coach. One of them was really good. One of them wasn't good. If he's already got 2 or 3 other coaches, fine. But, and Mike Tuck is our state director, and he does an awesome job and help me get in to fit in. And, just knowing, hey, can you go get Matt 18? Yeah, absolutely. And just run over there, So, all right. Well, I've taken
with that, coach, can I make one more point?
Oh, of course.
When I do coaching assignment, there's a point coach and there's a second coach. Point coach is the coach yelling instruction, technical advice, knowing, the hope is that number one, the point coach is going to have a better perspective on techniques, that they're good at, right? And positions that they're strong in. The secondary coach would be the coach yelling time, score, right? So it's kind of stepping back the hope is for me, that we're putting the wrestler in the best situation possible for best performance, right? And you don't want 2 coaches trying to do the same thing.
I see that all the time.
Because you work together that way, right? Now and it helps me because sometimes, I'm admittedly, sometimes a secondary coach is my best role if I don't know the kid real well, because you like step back and let them find the positions that they're familiar in, and you'll kind of learn as you coach multiple matches in a row of their positions they're strong in, places they like to be and they're comfortable, things they're good at, but always letting them know the situation of the match, right? And your second coach, like, hey, coach, maybe the first coach is still the coach is going to go to the if there's a challenge or ask the questions, right, that you're allowed to ask, which are very few now, right? But keeping that good cooperation or alignment in the corner is big.
I couldn't agree more. You hear these coaches yelling over the top of each other. Like I was the secondary coach for a guy, and like I would say, for example, like Chris, hey, we're losing 4-3. We got to get to 5 because they got 2. Just while you're like, hey, they got 2 2s, we got a 2 and a 1, so we lose 4-4.
Exactly.
Just
focusing on the criteria. Yeah.
Because again, I'm not yelling or like, hey man, I think he needs to circle to the back leg away from the lead leg, and then you decide if that's important to yell or not because your athlete, and if you might tell a kid to circle and then their brain shuts off and they stop wrestling because they're just thinking about that, and them.
Yeah, exactly.
You just got to go wrestle hard here. And so like, it might be good advice, but it might be advice for the wrong guy or the wrong girl.
Yeah.
So it all that's sort of the battle behind the battle. Like I'm very good friends with Hardell Moore, and he's figured out a way in Oklahoma to kind of be friends with everybody. Like he's coaching Stillwater kids and Edmond North kids. Like I always tell him, if he ran for governor, he'd probably win down there. But it's important that those kids, they all came through his kids club, and that's why, like, they know him and they trust him, and he's not there for the shine. Like he's just there to help those kids win. And so,
well, it's about relationships, right? It really is. Wrestling is, I think more than anything at all levels, wrestling is about building relationships, right? And I love our sport because some of our top people, coaches, athletes, they're so accessible to our younger, wrestling community. It's amazing, right? You see, young wrestlers from Idaho every year, they go down to Las Vegas, the US Open, and they're taking pictures with Jordan Burroughs or, David Taylor, etc.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that that's, that other sports are like that, right? Where the top athletes and names in our sport are accessible to the younger age.
Yeah, it's I think it was 2018. I was coaching a guy in the World Team Trial Finals. Mm-hmm. His head coach couldn't go, so I went. I would have been the B coach using AB, and mm-hmm. So I became the A, and my dad was the B. And my dad was great. Like he did the exact same thing. Like let me talk to me, but we got done. We're sitting in the stands, and we're sitting. This was the one in Nebraska where like Burroughs Dake had the epic 2 out of 3. Taylor Cox had the epic 2 out of 3 where they were like on a swimming pool. And my dad, who's kind of seen everything, goes, we literally coached on the same mats as these guys, and we're sitting 8 feet away from this person and that person, the other thing. And that was really before like the podcast and stuff had taken off. And it is, now it's like, hey, that guy was on the pod. She was on the pod, coach was on the pod. But it is a unique experience. And I think most wrestlers came from humble beginnings. And I think most wrestlers got their tails kicked when they started. Like very few of us were just good right away. Yeah. And you get humbled first.
Count me in that group, yeah.
Yeah, right. I told you my first story is not a pretty one. So, well, you said it perfectly about the importance of relationships in our sport, and I'm blessed that you and I have a friendship and a relationship. And unselfishly, your story made a lot of sense with what you guys did at Fargo. Selfishly, and I want to say this the right way. I'm happy for you, but I'm proud of you. And even though we're the same age, I don't want that in any way to come across as condescending. I'm just genuinely proud of you because you did something that's probably dang near impossible if you literally looked at the metrics of it and said this state with 4,000 members and this level of population versus the other states is going to figure out a way to get it done. Just really well done, my friend.
Thanks, Dave. Your friendship means a lot to me. And your opinion probably matters just as much, even more.
Well, we're all super impressed. I'm to say that. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's Chris Owens. I'm David Mirikitani. We'll speak to you all next week.